There we go. So, like I said previously, hey, Sean, the more you guys participate and contribute and ask questions, the better and the more valuable this is going to be for everyone who gets it on the other end. So let me go ahead and share my screen with you. And while I do that, I'll tell you just a little bit about me. I am Danny Cook, for those of you guys who don't know me. I started out with ruralorganizing.org in January doing their exit interview project, where I talked to 50 organizers all across the country. And we kind of talked about what were the challenges, what were the things that worked great, what are the things that we need coming into 2023 and 2024. And then we put out a report on that. And then I did this project with the top 100 rural power building counties for 2024. And this was a pretty extensive project. You'll see lots of the data. I'm going to show you the clean, pretty version that I put together for you, and then what I call my dirty version. So I'll show you my spreadsheet. And then I moved over to the rural vote side. And so this is about kind of how do we take this data and this information and use it in a meaningful way to move the needle, maybe even flip some counties in some of these states that are important. And of course, Wisconsin is one of those. So I'm going to go ahead and click present, and it will hopefully like me. I'm going to do full screen, and hopefully I'll still be able to see everything else. Yes, I will. Yay. Okay, perfect. So like I said, what I want you to remember is the first part of this where we talk about power building. You won't see every county, every rural county that maybe is important for 2024 on that list, but you will see it for the entire presentation, because just because it didn't make the power building list doesn't mean that it's not important for 2024. So when we talked about power building, it was about, which counties could we use to actually change something in the whole dynamic. And I'll explain that in just a second. So when I went into this, remember that we were talking about power building, and it doesn't mean that they're not relevant, because they are. This is a short-term piece of a very long-term strategy. And we're going to talk more about that in just a second. There were 17 states that ended up kind of on my list. And of course, you guys are Wisconsin. And what I did was I went through your election results from 2020 through 2022. So your presidential results, your House results, your gubernatorial results, Senate and House again, then your voter registration information, turnout information, population, and the percent rural. And then I took all of that data and then kind of analyzed it to get to this power list. And so what that looked like for me was I started looking at all of the states that were swing states or battleground states where we had margins that were 10% or less. And then I looked at, so what are the, number of electoral votes that come with those states, and kind of analyze them from like the, most important. So imagine a funnel as we look at this. And then within those states, I started to look at the rural counties that also had margins that were 10% or less for each of those elections. And what was really cool was once we started identifying those counties that had those margins in each of the elections, it was important to cross-reference those counties to see which counties kept showing up in this data, right? And it got really interesting, because I might see a county that was showing up, blue on one election result, and then it might be red on another. And it was just really like, what in the world, what would cause that to happen? And even sometimes in the same year. So I might see a red county that was presidential, but then see, it turned blue in that same election year for the House. And what usually that indicated was that it was the incumbent. And that's usually when you see that split in the vote, which is also interesting, right? But once we cross-referenced those elections, those counties across all the elections, it was identifying the counties that were repetitive, that kept showing up. And then we looked at what are the population of those counties, what's the percent rural. And then once that was determined, it was, where can we use them for a power build? And the best example I can give of this is Colorado. So I identified 10 counties in Colorado, rural counties in Colorado that were, that fit all of this criteria. Well, 7 of those 10 turned out to all be in the same House district, District 3, which is Bobart's district, right? So it was like, okay, if I'm going to put them on the power building list, definitely those 7 are going on it. All 10 are important, right? But those 7 we can use for power. So hopefully that makes sense as to how we did this data. The reason why I want you to keep population is in mind is you might say, well, what about this county or what about that county? If the county had a smaller population, say it only had 2,000 people in it versus another county that had 8,000, obviously when you look at power and where you want to put resources, population came into play. So this is the power piece of it, right? So when we looked at Wisconsin, we wanted to look at which ones could impact the next presidential and the House elections. So Biden won by less than 1% of the vote. And so all we needed to flip that state was 20,682 votes. So in just the counties of Crawford, Dunn, Grant, Jackson, Pierce, Portage, you know, I can't say this one, Wisconsin, so you can help me out with that one. Is it Trupelo? Trempelo? I'm from the South. Y'all can help me out. Say it.
Trempelo.
Trempelo. I was close. Thank you, Sue. And Vernon counties, we had 187,379 rural people and 178,758 registered voters. Right. So when we look at the number of people there plus the votes that we needed, we had 16,628 registered voters that didn't vote. So that's 80% of that vote difference. So, and that's just in these rural counties. So I'm not talking about everywhere else. I'm just talking about these rural counties. So when we think about the power play that can be made, it's, oh my gosh, if we can mobilize the voters in these rural counties that were registered to vote and they didn't vote, we can account for 80% of the vote difference for the entire state. And when you use this data, this information, this is how you prove the value of rural voters. We get left out a lot of times, right? But when you can go to funders and organizations and say, listen, these counties right here can account for 80% of what we needed to flip this state, it becomes a very powerful tool. So we want to keep that in mind when you look at this data on how to do that. And then additionally, these 8 counties are part of House District 3, right? That those House districts, you lost that candidate, the Democratic candidate lost by 11,766 votes in 2022. 49,712 registered voters didn't vote. That's 400% of what's needed, right? So having this information, maybe sometimes we'll kind of say, oh, look, it was closer than we thought. And we could have done so much more with this had we put our resources in the right areas, and then also looked at what do we need to do in those areas. So this is your presidential 2020 data. So what you'll see is all of your counties, your presidential votes, your Dem votes, your Republican votes, and your other votes. Now I'm going to stop right here because this will get repetitive, and I'm going to go to like what I call my dirty version and show you my spreadsheet. So give me 1 second. Are y'all with me? Y'all are quiet, and I feel like I'm like going a mile a minute.
You're fine. You're fine. We're
awesome.
with
you. Good. All right. So am I on Wisconsin? I am. And Zoom is not being my friend. Bear with me 1 sec, guys. There we are. Okay. So here's where you can see exactly what I was talking about. When I looked at these, the numbers for these counties, I've identified the counties where that percentage is less than 5. So Vernon, you see automatically, Sauk, you see automatically, Portage, you see, Door, you see automatically for your presidential election. And then turn around and look at your gubernatorial, like it's less than 1%. And this is 2020. It shouldn't say 2022. It's different for each of you because not every state has the same elections in the same years, but I know yours. So anyway, but this is how I kind of went through the data. And then I looked at what percentage of your counties where, less than percent, it was less than 10% versus, less than 5%. And then the actual voter turnout. Now, this is kind of what you want to see. Let me admit Andrea in here. Hey, Andrea, good to see you back. So we looked at what are the current registration numbers when I was kind of analyzing this data and looked at the percentage of the population that's actually voting. So you have 3 counties where less than 50% of your population is actually voting. And then you have 11 when it comes to your gubernatorial and your Senate races. That's really important because we know that those off presidential, those midterms are going to have lower voter turnout, but how do you get those folks a little bit more engaged in terms of, getting out the votes when it's not a presidential election, because that's a drastic flip. So that's another reason why your data is so important. So if I look at your population and what your registered voting is, so you can see here, it's anywhere from about 52, 53%, all the way up to as high as 73% in terms of your voter registration. Sometimes I've talked to folks where their voter registration, they're in a state where they're automatically registered. I don't know if it works that way in Wisconsin or not. So they might have what looks like 80 and 90% voter registration, but then like 55, 60% voter turnout. So if these are actual numbers of people that have registered to vote at some point in time, then you're going to want to see, okay, do we need to focus on a voter registration campaign or a get out the vote campaign? And it looks like maybe a little bit of both, but this is where you want to look and divide up your resources, if that makes sense. Yes, Sue.
Yeah, so this is for not necessarily Democratic votes. So this is people who are registered to vote either way and people who show up either way. Is that correct?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
And then it's broken down here in this next section, right? So if I look at, we'll just take Crawford, for example. I know that there are 9,414 people that are registered to vote. I know that almost 4,000 of them have voted Democratic in the last presidential election. I know that 4,600 voted Republican. And so we're looking at, and you can kind of base it off that. Not every state gives me that data and that information. No auto voter, thanks, Denise. So this kind of gives you a guideline. This column right here becomes really important. These other votes, these are folks that we know are already voting. So I want you to think about 2020 and how important that election was. We all know what was at stake and what continues to be at stake. And yet there were all of these people, right? You can see there are what, 4,800 people that could not get themselves to vote either way. That is insane. These are people who are involved in the voting process, but for whatever reason could not commit to one of those two candidates. And those are people that we know are engaged. They want to vote. They're in the process, right? But we couldn't win them. And so that's kind of what this is. So what I wanted to see was, hey, if we got those folks, how close could we get to flipping this county, or how great could we extend the lead? Because some of these were really close. Like, for example, whoops. Well, I tried to let her in. I don't know. She'll come back, I think. Zoom wasn't my friend. Okay, so look at this one. So this vote is a few hundred. Well, there were 320 people that voted other, right? Almost the difference. So if we gained these others, we'd be ahead by 600. Are you following me on that? I got some, maybe I missed it, but how are we defining the rural counties for this? Yep. So rural counties are defined differently. When we get to it, there's actually a percentage. We used the 2010 census data because some of the information changed in the next census data. But over here, we get to like, what's the population? And then what percent of those counties are actually rural? And so that's kind of what we used to determine who was going to make the list and the number of rural people and rural voters that were available to us. And then we have the state population rank as well. So that's also in the data when we get going, but hopefully that answers your question. We use the 2010 census data. So when we looked at, that's what I was talking about. So right here, when I look at the other votes, I can now say, okay, look, what happens if we get these voters? Because we didn't win this county. We didn't win Door by much, right? So what do we do how do we extend that lead? Do we get more people registered to vote? Because in Door County, 72%, 73% of the population is registered to vote. Only 67% of the population actually turned out to vote in the presidential election. And 320 people that did turn out couldn't get themselves to vote for Biden over Trump, right? And so we're missing them somewhere. Where does that come in? And so if you know these counties, this is where you want to kind of get in touch with the folks who are on the ground. Who are your influencers in this county? Who has their finger on the pulse of the county to know what's happening and where's the disconnect coming at. Are we losing them in the Democratic messaging? Are we losing them? Do they have what I call politic fatigue? Because I don't know about you all, but it's very easy, if you stay immersed in it, to just get worn out by the rhetoric in politics. So we're going to talk about that a little bit more as well. Yep. So Denise, and it did flip blue, but still not by much. When I look at it, let me keep going down to 2022. So when you say in the last two major elections, okay, cool. Because look at what happened in your House votes with Door County. What happened? I don't know what happened. Maybe you all can tell me. And then it should be red for Senate. Do you have something different than this, Denise? Because I'm happy to double check my numbers. I am human, but I think these are pretty spot on. I usually double and triple check them. So when you come to look, Door is a county that is super close by a couple hundred votes each time, each election, or less than, right? Here you're talking about a 74 votes difference, and 26 of those voted other. So it's about really paying attention to the numbers and looking at, okay, so who do we have that's turning out to vote? Where are they going? And then you'll see in the House votes that this is what it came down to. Once these counties were identified, it was about looking at what districts were they in. You can see there's a ton in District 3. The next one is District 2. There's 4 of those or 5, and then 7 and 8. So that's kind of the priority when you look at where your numbers are right. Thank you. You had me scared for a second, Denise. I was like, usually I'm really spot on. But yeah, so this is the data, and this is in the pretty version that you're going to get. So that you'll be able to see your Dem votes, your Republican votes, your other votes, your districts. All of those are in the PDF that you're going to get at the end of this. So, I mean, it took a long time to put the information together, but when you look at how can you use this data for fundraising? How can you use this data for strategic organizing? Are you going to use it for voter registration? Are you going to use it for GOTV? And someone asked me last week, they said, you're making a distinction between those two, and I am. And the reason why I'm making a distinction between those two is one of the states that I had last week, they did have automatic voter registration, right? And so sometimes those numbers are deceiving. And so you want to really focus on, they're not the same thing. Just because I'm registered doesn't mean I'm turning out. And if you have 10 counties where less than 50% of the population is turning out to vote, then yeah, you need to have a voter registration drive. And so it's about finding out, why are people disengaged and disconnected from the process? Where have we lost them along the way? One of the things that I love to say to people is, okay, so at some point in time, and I need to look down here at yours. Okay, yes. Okay, so down here, I've also taken a look at like how many people were registered to vote in 2020, how many are registered to vote in 2022, and then up here, you actually even have 2023 numbers. Whoop, right here. So I've got your 2023 numbers as well, right? But if I just look between 2020 and 2022, I want to see how many voters are we losing or gaining in terms of registered to vote. And you can see in almost every single one of these counties, the number of registered voters declined. And we need every single one that we can get. So again, it becomes, what happened? Right? And if you have registered voters who are on here and you're talking to them, but they didn't vote in the last election, what do you think the first question that we ought to be asking them is? If they're registered to vote and they didn't vote, what's the question that we ask? Anybody? Come off mute.
How can I help you vote next time?
How
Why
can I
didn't
help
you
you
vote
vote?
last time? Did you need a ride? What happened?
Yeah, so this is my question always. So can you, and I always use this word, I use the word share. Can you share with me what happened that you didn't vote in the last election? Can you share with me? Not can you tell me, not anything else. Share with me. Share is a much more, it sounds like we're in this together, right? So can you share with me why you didn't vote in the last election? right? And then it's how can I help? Because I have this thing that I kind of live by. If you've heard me say this, you'll hear me say it 1,000 times. People don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. By asking someone why, when I ask someone to share their life with me and their reasoning and what happened, I am indicating I care about whatever the barrier was in your life. So maybe you didn't have daycare. Maybe you don't have transportation. Maybe you're in an area where the polls closed earlier than the nicer part of town. But I'm saying to you, share some of your life with me. And so I'm indicating that I care. And so then I can come behind with the numbers, but the numbers are to help you with strategy. The numbers are to help you knowing where you need to put your resources. How do you get voter turnout? Where do you focus on first? And then the second piece of that is approaching it from a place that gets people involved in the process. What happened? Why aren't you invested in the game? And you'll hear a lot of people say different things like, I'm just sick of it. Right? It's there's just all the different times and that sort of thing. So let me go back to the presentation really quick, just so you can see the rest of it. It makes me change my screens. And while I'm doing that, you all let me know if you have any other questions. Wisconsin. Okay. Perfect. All right. So this is exactly what we were talking about on the other screen. So I've got your 2020 presidential, your 2020 House with all of your districts over to the right. Your gubernatorial results are here, your 2022 Senate and your 2022 House. Door is a county that you really want to focus on because it went blue for the last presidential election, but it went strong Republican for your 2022 House vote. And I think even, your Senate vote was so close. Okay. So I don't know if that's because your House person is the incumbent. I'm not sure what caused such a significant shift, or maybe the candidate for your House seat wasn't that great, but somewhere something disconnected. So use this data to look at them and say, okay, so where do I see trends? Where were we blue, even if we were light blue in 2020? And where did we shift to red? And figuring out kind of what that is. And if you have areas that are blue, how do you get to dark blue from light blue? Your population data and percent rural. This tells you the number of people that are in your rural counties. And so you want to look at how do you approach those counties? Where do you have geographic challenges? Where do you have your most dense populations, even in those rural spaces? Where do you need to plan around things that are already happening? So somebody said to me, listen, we're really spread out, and I'm in Northeast Tennessee. So when I go outside of the immediate town area, right, city area, it gets that way too. We call it the holler around here. I don't know what y'all call it in Wisconsin, but we got folks up in the holler around here. So when we plan that, I have to look at, well, okay, so what are the events? Is there a strawberry festival happening? Is there, a farmer's market that people go to? Where can I go that people are already gathering to be able to use the most of my resources and reach as many people as possible in the shortest amount of time, because time is money. And then the same thing when I'm looking at, I don't know why these turned, but they did. Let me turn these white for you guys so you can see them. Okay. And then looking at your voter turnout data and your voter registration data. These two things go together. Does that make sense? And I tend to run through this a little bit fast because I'm used to it. You guys aren't used to it. So what I'd like to do now is to stop and pause for just a second and let you all ask me questions about the data, about the process, about strategy, and that sort of stuff. Don't be shy. Yes,
I have
ma'am.
a question.
Sure. I'll do Shanu and then Sue.
Okay. So I was the one that posed the question about how the rural counties are being defined. And part of that is because I don't see any of the northern counties, which is where we're located, represented in the data. So
Mhm.
I wonder, like, these are the counties you focused on. Did you collect data on some of the other ones? In particular, in the northwest part of the state, we lost where in areas where we have traditionally had pretty blue representation in our House seats. In the last election, lost 2 seats in that area. And so I think I'm curious to see how the numbers played out in those particular areas as we're kind of going in to 2024, and those seats will be up again.
Okay, so let me take a look. Do you know which house seats we're talking about?
Yeah, it would have been Assembly Districts 73 and 74.
Okay, I'm going to share my screen with you and we'll kind of take a look. And then once I get in here, because I did 17 states, so it's hard for me to remember exactly why at the moment I did or didn't
Yeah.
include something, but let's just look together. I saw somebody else say something. Yeah, no worries, Matthew. Thanks for coming. And you guys will get all this in a follow-up email. Okay, so you're talking about maybe 7. Does that sound
Yeah, but I'm talking for the state ledge seats. It's
Oh, okay.
yeah.
Perfect. Now I'm so glad why you clarified, because we didn't do it on state. This focus was specifically at first on general for the federal elections because we're going into 2024, right? So
Mhm.
that's why we haven't. There are ways that you can kind of look at the state level data, and maybe that's something that I'm making notes because I love the fact that you asked me this question. Because we have talked about the importance of the local elections and all of this. This was done specifically for the federal elections heading into 2024.
Mhm.
And the only state election that I included was the gubernatorial race. Everything else was
Okay.
federal. But I'll take this back and say, hey, maybe the next level, the next piece of this are the state levels, and see what they say. And if they give me the green light, I'm happy to do the same work.
And I would and just to clarify too, so those are in CD7. So that whole top part there.
Yes. Okay, that's what I thought. Because as soon as I looked at it, I was like, okay, well, I can see exactly why they weren't in this for the federal piece. I get
Yeah.
it. Yeah. But no, I'm happy to take a look and take it back. So the next piece of this, and Craig, I'm going to get to you, and Sue, I'm going to get to you next. The next piece of this is so the other piece that I'm working on right now, because most people know me because of my healthcare advocacy. Like we had a medical monopoly that was created here where I live. Like legally, if you know what a COPA is, well, just horrible for people. And so like I was very, very vocal here, and we collected like 30,000 local signatures, and we lived outside of a hospital for like 9 months and all kinds of stuff. So what I started looking at was rural hospital closures, because healthcare is an issue that is nonpartisan, kind of going along to what Craig is talking about. So what I've started doing now is compiling a list and looking at what counties in each of these states have hospitals that are at risk of closure. And then I'm identifying if any of those counties or how many of those counties are part of this list as well, right? So like for Georgia, and I just know Georgia, I worked the Abrams campaign last year. And it's fresh in my mind. So like there were 9 counties that were on Georgia's power list, right? Well, 5 of them were power, but 9 on the list total. Out of those 9, 5 have counties that have hospitals at risk of closure. That is messaging that is gold, right? And in a nonpartisan way. So yeah, so Craig, let me do Sue and then Craig. Sue, go ahead. You had something?
Yeah, just a really quick clarifying question on your graphs. When you have a percentage of rural for each of those counties, it's a column that says percentage rural, and it says like 69%. That's like, are you saying that's the percentage of people in that county that are considered rural, or is that a percentage outside that county?
No,
What
that's
does
the
that mean?
percentage of that county that is considered rural. That came from the 2010 census data.
That's
So
interesting, just because I would consider all of those counties 100% rural.
yeah,
So I'm not sure how they're defining rural, so that's
I'm
interesting.
not sure how the census exactly defines it, but that's where it's coming from. It comes from the census
Okay,
data.
all
Yeah.
right, thank
So
you. That's all.
yeah,
Just a
no
quick question.
worries. Yeah. So Craig, to answer your question, I am 100% behind GOTV in a nonpartisan way. I had people that were really surprised when I was in Marietta in Cobb County, right? And I was talking to people. I'm wearing my big purple Stacey Abrams, and I'm talking to people about, hey, early voting has started, and sometimes people are like, I voted for Kemp, and I'm like, that's okay. I'm okay with that. When did you vote? Because it actually starts next week. And she's like, I voted in August, and I'm like, well, girl, you got to do it again. And she was like, really? I was like, yeah, like that was the primary. You have to vote again for the actual election. And I said, it doesn't matter to me who you're voting for. I just want you to vote. Why can I say that confidently? Because I know that if more people vote, we win anyway. And when I say we, I don't necessarily mean quote unquote Dems, but I do mean progressive policies that are good for people. So the more people that we can get out and engaged in the process, then the more policies that are good for people are going to win inevitably. So it's about how to have those conversations. So GOTV, including voter registration and turning out the vote, is nonpartisan. And for me, the way that I approach that is just like I told her, I want you to vote. It doesn't matter to me that you don't agree with me. Like I literally care enough about you as a person that I want your voice represented in this process. You know what I mean? Sue.
Sorry about that. Just to clarify, so for example, in my county, a get out the vote kind of thing, we're so thickly Republican here that we don't want a GOTV because we just know we're feeding. I mean, it just is not a good idea. I mean, that's the way I think of it. But maybe on the broad scale, it's a good idea. But in this specific county where we're organizing, it just feels like we're just bringing Republicans to the voting poll.
So where are you located at?
We're in this teeny tiny little all rural county in central Wisconsin, Marquette County. We have 15,000 people and it's solidly Republican, even though we're making progress.
So when you say solidly, give me an idea of your numbers real quick. I mean, I could look them up, but do you know, are you 80% Republican, 70% Republican? What are you?
Oh gosh, I don't even know because I'm not a real data person, but like everybody who runs anything here, the municipal leaders, the county leaders, the school leaders, for the most part are all Republican. You can ask people, why are you Republican? And they say, because everybody is,
Yes.
So we usually come in, I think maybe a third of the votes are Democrat, something like that.
Yeah, so Marquette, I'm looking at your Senate results. So you're about 65%, 35%. So I want to give you just a smidge because I'm in a place that is worse than you. We have more people, but we are like an 80, 20, 85, 15. So I hear you. And so if I look at your numbers and I think 65, 35, I'm going to round up because I'm positive and optimistic. So I'm going to say you guys are sitting at like 70, 30, right? 65, 35.
Well, maybe
40%.
for presidential kind of stuff, but definitely not for district congressional things. So
Yeah, so this was your Senate that I was
statewide.
looking at really quick because it was easy for me to look at. But so if I just say, because 35%, 3.5, I can round up to 40, right? So how can I use this? How can I use that to be able to talk to people? So what I can say is, listen, I know it seems like it's overwhelmingly Republican here, but I want to share this with you. Out of every 10 people that voted in the last Senate election, 4 of them were Democrats. That's almost 50-50, right? So those were the people that were brave enough to come out of their houses and vote. How many Dems aren't voting because they think I'm a blue dot in a sea of red, so my vote doesn't matter? How many of them aren't voting because they're scared they're going to get kicked off of their, church board? How many of them, right? I mean, that's a real thing when you live in places like where we live. But if people find out that even though they might be in the minority, they are in a growing minority, and maybe they don't know that there's 4 out of 10 other people who view things the way they do that are already heading to the polls. So it's looking at that half, not quite, that glass not quite half full, but it's just better than saying, hey, we're so outnumbered, I don't want you to vote. No, I do want you to vote, and I do want to have difficult conversations with you about why you're voting the way you are. Sometimes we run from those in counties like where we live. And I'll share this with you. So, and then I'll get to Craig. So like where I'm at, they really wanted to use my progressive views to shame me and like not get the public support behind me. Because now imagine I'm a number one, where I live, it's 97% white, right? So that's already going to be a thing. Right? I was funded by George Soros and Antifa and Black Lives Matter and all that good stuff. And my response was, well, George, if you see me, feel free to send me a check because I haven't gotten one yet. And in order for Black Lives Matter to be funding me, there'd have to be enough Black people here for us to matter. So that's not a thing either. But what I have said to people is, you cannot shame me for wanting to protect people. So like right now I'm escorting for our clinic. We have a women's clinic. So I'm in Bristol. It's Bristol, Tennessee, and Bristol, Virginia. Okay. So when Roe v. Wade happened, Tennessee, obviously, we're as bad as Texas almost. So the clinic reopened under a different name just on the Virginia side of town, like literally half a mile away. So I escort patients. So one of the things that I've taken to doing is every week I put up a post that says things I heard while defending patients who are seeking reproductive health care, right? And I share with them what these people are saying. Like we have an anti who says things like, how are you going to feel when you flush your baby down the toilet like trash? We've had, anti saying to a 2-year-old toddler, your mom's in there killing your brother or sister, right? Things like that. So your eyes got really big. But so like last week, I went live when I was out there and they're with a megaphone. And all I said was, tell me how this is godly. I'm not going to argue with you about abortion. That's not the argument. The argument is, even if you disagree, you say you're out here because of God. Is this the way that God would have you do it? Right? And what you will see is I'm in a very red, very conservative, and every person on my live was like, no, they shouldn't be doing that. That's just awful. And that's not how Jesus would want it done. See, I don't have to get you to win that reproductive rights are like the best thing ever. All I have to do is turn you against the folks that are out here being crazy, right? Right? So, because, the enemy of my enemy is my friend. So it's thinking about, how do we have these conversations? I'm always going to do two things. I'm going to respect freedom of religion because God did. And I'm going to respect free will because God did. Right? So what I say to those folks is, I'm out here because of my faith too. And I'll say, so let me just see if you agree with the things I believe. So do you believe that God is the giver of life? And they'll say, absolutely, 100%. Perfect. Me too. Do you believe that God is all knowing? He knows our beginning from our end. Yeah. Perfect. Do you believe that God is everywhere present? He is. Do you believe that God is all powerful? Absolutely. And I'll say, so that means that at a time God allows a woman to get pregnant, he knows if she's going to have an abortion. He's in the clinic when she has it done, and he doesn't use his power to stop it. So can you share with me why you know better than God? I'm waiting, right? So it's not even about debating about bodily autonomy. It's, you say the reason you're here is because of God. So I'm going to talk to you from what you say is your reason. See what I'm saying? Okay, Craig, you had something.
Well, I'm going to try not to talk too much. I'm retired and losing my energy to keep doing as much as I have done for the 17 years since I moved to this great part of Wisconsin. Mm-hmm. I live in Buffalo County, which is 13,000 people, and the vote is, like you talked about, very conservative. But I also know from talking to a man who was a legislator in Illinois and campaign manager for his wife, who won Democratic seat here and also ran for governor. I also was involved in an issue in our rural area. It was frac sand mining, where I saw people come out in the hundreds and hundreds to fight for something they cared for. Mm-hmm. I have been very involved in the local Democratic Party and am phasing out of that, partly because we have been ignored in our rural areas by the state party. We have been given advice that has no bearing on our area. We have not gotten any help in this area. The man I mentioned, who is a retired expert in this kind of stuff, looked at the data and showed that for example, the last 1 or 2 elections, there were significant numbers of people who voted who never voted before. And gee, who got a lot of votes when Trump won the presidential campaign, or who got our congressional seat when the votes came out? It's because conservatives were reaching out to one-to-one to people in the rural area, and we have not been doing that. It's very difficult. I know that all too well. The geography makes it extremely difficult. But the state party has not been helpful to us. The national party has not. They're pumping all of their money into high-paid consultants, et cetera, and it has not worked. And the conservatives have gone person to person to convince people to vote who never voted before. We're told not to. In fact, last year, the state party would not allow us to any longer look at the rating of strong Republican, leaning Republican, et cetera, in the ban system, because some Democrats have made the horrible mistake of actually trying to reach out to some conservative people. And I was so pissed off about that. Anyway, there's all kinds of evidence that the high-powered consultants for state and national Democratic Party. So I think the way to reach out, and I live next to Trempealeau County, which in my area is where the population is. They have a lot more families with younger people. They have a high number of Hispanic people who are now eligible to vote because they were born here. We get ignored about all that stuff. So I'm done talking. I just needed to say what I wanted.
I see Gloria giving you thumbs up. And these are things that I've heard like very frequently, right? So this is one of the reasons why I wanted to do this data, right? Because when you can say to your state party, listen, we've got 10 counties, 10 rural counties that can account for 80% of the presidential deficit, give me some money and give us some attention and give us some focus. You said to me one thing that I do want to talk about. As you talked about your issue campaign that you all had that hundreds of people came out for. Okay, so one of the best things in the world that you can do is build off the momentum of an issue campaign and take it into an electoral campaign, right? So, so when you look at that issue, are you looking at and talking to people about who voted in favor of or against that issue, right? So I'll give you an example here. So y'all know about Tennessee Senator Marsha Blackburn. My nose automatically curled up. I can't stand her. I've met her in person. And so we, for the first time, are going to have somebody oppose her, Gloria Johnson, right? Part of the Tennessee Three, who I happen to know from Knoxville. So what have I been talking to people here about? Because I had tens of thousands of followers here because of the healthcare issue. Gloria is the only person who stood on the state floor and raised her mouth in opposition to our healthcare CEO here, right? I actually stood in Marsha Blackburn's office with 30,000 signatures from constituents here and asked her to help, and she turned her back. So I'm able to take that issue and say to all of the people in this region, Marsha abandoned us. We weren't even Gloria's constituents, and she spoke for us. Do you want to vote for somebody who cares about you or for somebody who left you and just abandoned you? Because there are literally like lots of people here who've died. So take the issues in these small towns and use those as momentum and justification to get people out to vote, to get people to turn against the conservatives that they've been voting for who aren't doing things in their best interest, and mobilize in that way. You can take that same data and that same information to your local party, to your state party, if you choose to, or other organizations. So, you know, state parties aren't the only places to get money. There are tons of organizations out there that are aligned with your issues who want to give money to people who want to talk to voters. So I hear what you're saying. And so my thing is, that's fine, but you're able to say to your state party, this is what you're missing out on. Investing in these 10 places accounts for 80% of what you need for the next presidential election. Wisconsin Dems has been helpful for outreach and efforts, organizing, canvassing, phone bank, and building members in Marquette, which is 15,000 people. Rural Power Labs is funding us for media purchases, about $500 a month. We could more help by Dems and DNC, however. Okay, awesome. So see, those are things. So let me just share with you. We meet, when I say we, it's literally for rural people and rural organizers and activists and political campaign people and whoever. But we meet the last Thursday of every month on a Zoom call like this. And the purpose of that is to share things like what Sue just shared, right? To be able to say, this is the place where we are doing well. These are places where we're getting funding. This is more of what we need. This is what's working for us. This is what's not working, so that we can learn from each other and build that momentum and increase our resources as we head into 2024, because that's what it's going to take. And trust me, I know what it means to get tired when you say you're frustrated and you're running out of energy. So this is why we have to build our teams like a relay race. Right? We have to have people to pass the baton off to, so that we can rest and recoup. So whether that's a 4-day weekend, whether that's a week long, whatever it is that you need, because we are absolutely too valuable to quit the race. I hate to say that, but you don't get to quit yet. You can be retired. You can be a little tired, but we still need you. So find out a way that still works for you to contribute, and then work that. So whether that is less energy with local Dems, but you're tapped into other philanthropic organizations, or, more local stuff, whatever it is that motivates you, what I would share with you is this: when you find a thing that speaks to your heart, right? It sounds so like hippie-ish and whatever, but it is so true. You will find that you don't run out of the energy as much, right? I don't focus on what anybody else is doing. I look at like what needs to get done. Who are the people that are willing to, I'm ex-military, you're never ex-military, but I'm prior military, right? So I always say strap on boots and Kevlar, but whatever you're saying is, I look at those people that are ready to strap up and go do the work. And if it's not you, then it's going to be somebody else. If it's not my state party or my local party, then it's going to be somebody else, because I'm going to find the folks that care enough about this region to mobilize them and get them going. And I'm going to find the issues that speak to them, that get them off their couches and out their doors. It is not ever going to be the best policy that motivates people to come vote. It's never going to be. Voting is an emotional thing. And the Republican Party has tapped into fear and anger, period. When is the last time the Democratic Party has tapped you into any other emotion than fatigue or frustration? Right? So this is what we have to be doing when we have our conversations, when we are talking to potential voters and registered voters or anybody else, Joe Blow down the street, the folks who've never voted before in their life. There's a thing that I say: you have to be able to touch, move, and inspire people in 4 minutes or less. Touch, move, and inspire in 4 minutes or less. People voted in 2016 and 2020 out of an external motivation. They were voting against Trump. Well, you may or may not have that external motivator from here on out. So you better find an internal motivator, which is inspiration, to be able to motivate people to get out the door. Does that make sense? I know I kind of went a little tirade there, but it's like, this is literally what I keep saying to folks. This is what's needed. We need the data. We need good policy, but if good policy was all we needed, we'd have won, hands down, right? So it's got to be great data, good policy, right? And then authentic outreach that touches, moves, and inspires people. They have to be able to believe that the change can happen. And they're going to pick up that by what you feel, right? So if you don't believe anymore, they're going to feel that you don't believe. Rural people are just like inner city people. They can detect BS a mile away. So if they don't believe you, they're not going to buy in. And we need people bought in. So let me share with you kind of what's next real quick. Let me get to the right page. I still have Wisconsin stuff pulled up, the results. So let me share with you this little piece before we wrap up. All right. So you're going to get this PDF presentation. And then you're also going to get the recording of this session, this deep dive session. You're going to get a link to the Top 100 Rural Counties project. You'll get a link to the 2020 exit interview. That exit interview project is so important. It has nuggets for organizers, for philanthropic organizations, and for your state legislators and your local legislators. That's always going to include an invite to join our monthly networking calls. I would love to see that monthly call just burst at the seams, because that's where our power is going to come from. We're going to be there to learn from each other, to share with each other, to inspire each other, right? And to hold each other accountable for the work that we know has to be done. We don't have the luxury of being tired for another 15, 16 months, folks. Right. So if you need a vacation, take it today, because we need you for the next year and something. And then I'm also working on a document that is your counties without Democratic Party representation. And then I'm working on your rural hospital closures. So what that's going to look like is for each of the states that we're focused on, and I can tell you which ones they are. Wisconsin is one of them, but it's Ohio, Montana, Wisconsin, Arizona, PA, Michigan, North Carolina, and Georgia. I'm going to be putting together a toolkit for you. And that toolkit will include all of this data. It will include your rural hospital information. It will include all types of things about how to build those issue campaigns and electoral campaigns and GOTV campaigns as we head into 2024. We're calling it our rural roadmap, right? And so that's what's coming next. And so I'll be delivering the things that you see on your screen to you in the next 5 days. And then the other pieces are sure to follow afterwards. So you can always come to the last Thursday of every month to our meeting and get the other information. We got 5 minutes left. Any comments, questions, concerns, feedback? I'm open to anything you want to share. Was it beneficial?
Hey, Danny.
Yes,
It's
ma'am.
Denise. And I just want to reinforce Shanu's comment about needing local and needing statewide races. And here's why. We're the most gerrymandered state in the United States. We are fighting gerrymandering pretty furiously, but it's a long process. To let you know how split we are, we won every single except for the Secretary of State, but we ended up except for the state treasurer. Statewide race in the last election, and we lost seats in the Assembly and the Senate in a pro-progressive candidates. So that kind of shows you where this gerrymandering is having a huge impact. And why, if we can't see the state races, the state Senate and the state Assembly, of where we can win, or where there's voters we're not reaching right now, that would just be a huge help for us. And I don't know how many hospital closings we're being impacted by right now, but we're being hugely impacted by the lack of childcare. And the state Assembly and Senate gavelled in and gavelled out in a special session and left $540 million off the table for childcare in the state of Wisconsin. So childcare is a huge issue, especially in our rural areas. Yep. Doctors aren't taking jobs in certain areas because they can't find childcare for their children, and all of that kind of stuff. So childcare, funding for public education, and issues like that. We have big push for privatization in the state of Wisconsin for public education.
Got it.
So that's why I would just really, for your funders, I would really encourage that they let you do a deeper dive for Wisconsin into state assembly and Senate seats.
Okay.
Because
That's good for me to know.
Yeah, that could tell us a lot.
Yeah, and I will take that back. So I happen to have just finished Wisconsin's. So this is kind of what your rural hospital situation looks like. And so there are 3 hospitals in Oneida that when I put this together, I'll share with you why I included them on my list, even if they didn't include. So the difference between the patient service margin and the total margin is that this is like your actual medical revenue, right? And then your total margin, you might end up being okay on your total margin, even though you're negative in your patient service margin, because maybe you have a grant from the city or the county or something like that that's keeping you afloat. So if you were negative in your patient service, even if you were positive in your total margin, you still made this list. And then if you were negative, of course, in both, then you made this list as well. So, and then I just said, if you're less than 5% in your margin, that's a concern for everyone. So, but this is the other piece. So what you just mentioned, Sue, is Denise, is perfect, because the other thing that we are talking about is finding the issues. Like you just named 3 for me right off the bat. And so part of that toolkit is going to be about how do you go about finding the issue campaigns? What do you do in terms of like, how do you use strategy around them and build resources around them, both for getting funding and for getting voter focus and mobilizing people. That's that political word, right? But inspiring people to actually get out based on those issues. So that will be part of the kind of rural roadmap toolkit that we're putting together for you as well. But I will.
Well, healthcare is a huge issue here, but it's access to health. It's access. I mean, the state of Wisconsin turned down, Medicaid expansion again.
Yeah.
They're one of the few states in the United States that have turned it. So and I know Shanu and those guys can probably speak to healthcare a whole lot more effectively than I can. And that access to healthcare is an issue.
100%.
And that kind of stuff, and more so than even, what I would think would be the hospitals, but I'm not as informed in that area as I should be. So that is access to healthcare is a huge issue in Wisconsin.
And those 2 things go together. So those 2 things go together, right? So having hospitals is going to determine how many independent physicians and how many specialty groups that you come in. You're not going to get, high level orthopedic surgeons, neurosurgeons, and people like that. Or even, OB/GYN. So in a lot of places where you have reproductive restrictions, like people are now driving an hour and a half for reproductive health care. I'm not even talking about abortion.
It's bad here.
Yeah. So I'll share this and then we'll wrap up. And I would love for you all to come on the call that's in 2 weeks. So the last Thursday of every month, or no, next Thursday. The last Thursday of every month, we meet at 2:00 on Thursdays, Eastern Standard Time. But every issue is going to come back to what I call one of the 4 pillars. So that's healthcare, housing, education, or economic stability, right? So when you look at, I just said obstetric care. We just said the same thing, Gloria. So these are the things that we want to look at, those 4 pillars, and identifying how they are impacting people on a like local county level, on a, community level, like for us, we're a bunch of smaller counties together, and then a statewide level. So 100%, that's all what we're focusing on that toolkit.
Did you say economic stability or security?
I don't know what I said, but I meant economic security. I don't know what I said, but I meant economic security. Yes. So
I'm sure that's what you said.
Healthcare, housing, education, and economic security. Those 4 pillars. Yeah. But you guys have been great. I appreciate you all for joining me. You will get all of this information emailed to you in the next couple of days. And I hope to see you on next Thursday's call at 2:00.
Thank you so much. Goodbye.
Yeah, you're very welcome. Thank you, guys.